Hi, my name is Leo Shin, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Asian Studies and the Department of History at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. I'm also the convener of the UBC Hong Kong Studies Initiative, which was launched in 2017 to promote the study of Hong Kong, both here at UBC and beyond. I would like to formally begin our event this afternoon by acknowledging that the University of British Columbia, Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We here at UBC are very grateful to be able to carry out our work on this land. Today's conversation with authors Cheuk and Julia Lin is co-organized by the UBC Hong Kong Studies Initiative, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, and the Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society. This event is part of HKSI's City Reassembled series, a series of seminars, conversations, and screenings to explore the past, present, and future of the Hong Kong diaspora. It is also part of the explorASIAN Festival, which takes place each May to showcase and celebrate the cultural diversity that Asian Canadian communities bring to Canadian society. Today's conversation will be moderated by my friend and colleague, Allan Cho. Allan is a man of many hats and talents, as I'm sure many of you know. A librarian and a fiction writer, Allan is the executive director of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop and the executive editor of the Rise Paper magazine. He also directed the recently concluded 2022 LiteraSian Festival. Allan is also the father of a young child, I should mention, so that is really his full-time job. Without further ado, let me yield the screen and invite Allan to introduce our guest speakers and to kick off our conversation today. Off to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Leo. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're tuning in, everyone. My name is Allan Cho. It's a pleasure to be here and celebrating Asian Heritage Month with you. I am currently here in our office in the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, which is in the heart of Chinatown here on Kiefer Street. So it's I thought it would be kind of neat to be here in Chinatown as I'm moderating today's session. So I wanted to share a little bit about that with you. The Asian Canadian Writers Workshop has been a nonprofit organization since 1996. And over the years, we've really promoted and highlighted Canadian writers of Asian heritage. So today's session is really about that and about the diversity of Asian Canadian literature. I'm going to introduce our two authors today. First off is Julia Lin. Julia was born in Taiwan and lived there and in Vietnam before her family immigrated to Canada when she was 9. Since then, Julia has lived in Vancouver and its environment, Toronto, and Northern British Columbia. She holds a graduate degree in immunology, Master of Science at the University of Toronto, and a postgraduate degree in computing education from the University of British Columbia. And she has taught high school math and science in British Columbia for a number of years. Her writing mentor, MG Fasanji, encouraged her to complete the short story collection Mia after she submitted the first stories in 2009 in the Humber Creative Writing Program. She was treasurer of the Writers Union of Canada from 2016 to 2020, and is a past board member of the Vancouver Public Library, as well as the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. Julia is currently serving a 2-year term as the first vice chair of the Writers Union of Canada. And in 2023 will become the first Asian woman to serve as chair. Julia was also the moderator of LiteraSian Festival at our opening. And so I'm so grateful and honored to be moderating for her event today. And then next up is Cheuk. Sam is a Hong Kong-born Canadian author of Love Figures, Deus Ex Machina, and Postscripts from a City Burning. He holds a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from New York University and a BA in English Literature from the University of Toronto. He is currently working on Marginalia, which examines the function, execution, and generative potential behind censorship. Sam lives in Vancouver. So a little housekeeping for today. We're going to start off with Julia, who will give a presentation reading, an introduction to her writing, and talking a little bit about her inspiration influence on her fiction and nonfiction writing. And then we'll hand it over to Sam, who will also do a reading, an introduction to his writing, and talk about his inspiration influence on his poetry. And then I'll have some questions for our authors, and then we'll open up to questions to everyone. So without further ado, over to you, Julia.
Okay, I'm going to try sharing screen and hope it works. I hope everybody can see my PowerPoint there. That's my website, that's my Chinese name. And oops, see, now I don't know if it's gonna work. So I would call myself one of those, or one of those. I grew up in Toronto and in Richmond. And so when my parents moved here, they really wanted me to integrate. So we didn't have a whole lot of influences culturally. They didn't even send me to Chinese school. That's a good thing, I think. But I do regret that, because I think my Mandarin could be a whole lot better. And so in Richmond, I grew up with very few Chinese influences. And it was only when I started writing that I really dug into my heritage. And, you know, when I started, I thought, I'm not going to be an ethnic writer. I'm just going to be a writer, right? No label. Yeah, that didn't work out, because everything that came out of me was Asian. And my first collection of short stories was all about Taiwanese immigrants, and it's called Mia. Mia means, in Taiwanese, it means fate or destiny. So I'm just going to read a little bit from one of the short stories. So it's actually the title story, and then I'll move on to other work that I've done. Okay, so let me introduce this a little bit. There's a narrator, which I'm going to read. And then she has a son who doesn't figure very prominently, but does get mentioned. And she's talking to her mother. And her mother is a first-generation Taiwanese immigrant who has moved to Canada, but she holds a lot of Taiwanese values. My mother asked me to accompany her to Taiwan for my grandmother's funeral. I was last on the island in 1975. 33 years ago, when I was 5. My Canadian father had returned to Vancouver to arrange for our immigration papers, and we stayed with my grandmother for a year on her farm in southern Taiwan. I still have a black and white photograph of myself in an oversized cotton dress, squinting in bright sunlight, standing barefoot on spindly legs under a banana tree. Wisps of hair have strayed from my loose plaits, and I am holding the hand of a man whose face is hidden by the shadow of his bamboo hat. Ama Dao, Taiwanese for grandmother's home. Ama's farm is the first home I can remember. It was where I learned the differences between grasshoppers and cicadas, frogs and toads, blazing stars and peonies, male and female Chinese deities, life and death, where I learned that some things are not permanent and there are mysteries in the adult world not spoken of to children, where I first heard my mother utter the words, "No need to tell." Now, as she peers at the measuring cup on the kitchen counter of our West Point gray bungalow and adds more stinky tofu brine to bring the meniscus up to the correct level, my mother says, "I got good deal on ticket. You come. No need to tell anyone." My mother is the only person I know who actually measures out ingredients for Chinese cooking as precisely as she follows new recipes for poached salmon or Cape Breton scones or maple syrup pie or tortilla or puff pastry. When I was living at home, she was chronically disappointed with my slovenly housekeeping habits. These days, she is aghast at the way I throw stir fries or spaghetti dinners together for my son and me. Slow, Tracy, do right. Orderliness, not just cleanliness, is important to her. Okay, I suppose I should come. I'm just worried about leaving Patrick with Dad for 2 weeks. You know, Patrick's never been away from me for so long before. Grains of glutinous rice trickle through the conical bamboo leaf cup I fashioned a moment ago, and I quickly scoop up the rice from the table, hoping my mother hasn't noticed. In my teens, I used to call her the Geiger counter for imperfection, able to detect flaws in the most unlikely places. To my surprise, my mother, who is usually hypervigilant when it comes to Patrick, says, "No worry, your father take good care. You come." She empties the contents of the measuring cup into a pot of fresh tofu, puts the lid on, and takes the cup out of my hands and expertly reshapes it. I compress my lips, exhale slowly, pick up 2 more bamboo leaves to form a cone, and pour rice into it. This time, the bottom holds. "Ma, do you remember when we lived with Amma? You know the man who lived there with us?" "Ah, yeah, Tracy, these things in past. What good to bring up? How it help you?" she asks in her annoying manner and gives me the look, guaranteed to silence further inquiries. When I was growing up, I always thought I would understand my mother when I became a mother myself, but Patrick is already 6 and I'm nowhere close to solving the tangram that is she. Like a member of some secret Chinese society, my mother has mastered the transformation of cloak from noun into verb. "No need to tell" was a refrain that I learned well, whether it was to keep silent about the small bill that she slipped out of my father's wallet, or to pretend that she wasn't home when canvassers appeared at the door, or to say, "Sorry, my mother can't come to the phone right now, she's in the shower." For her, truth is a malleable substance, homemade Play-Doh, superheated iron, genuine Chinese gold. But it isn't just the white lies. There is also no need to tell about her past, her family, or even things that we did last weekend to friends or my father's mother. One never knows how information will be used. Better safe than sorry. When I speak to my father about the man with the limp, he says, "I'm afraid I'm not much help, honey. Your mother has never told me. All I know is that her family lived through the White Terror and some of her relatives were implicated. I really don't know the details." I've read the history books, but I'm not any closer to understanding. I know that during the White Terror, hundreds of thousands of political dissidents were imprisoned or executed under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek after his Kuomintang troops, comprised entirely of mainlanders, were chased off mainland China to Taiwan by the communists. Martial law was imposed in May 1949 and not lifted until 1987. My mother, like many native Taiwanese of a certain age, has a deep-seated hatred of the mainlanders, or Guaxinglang, Taiwanese for out-of-province people. Half-century under Taiwan, then half-century under Kuomintang. Too much. My mother would sigh and shake her head, and that would be the end of the discussion. But like generations of native Taiwanese who weathered colonization by the Dutch, Spanish, and Japanese, my mother has inherited Taiwanese resilience, which has helped her acclimatize to a land where her lack of fluency in English has forced her to be a lab technician instead of a professor. Her sighs signify acceptance of her mia. As an act of defiance, my mother made sure that I learned the main native Taiwanese dialect spoken by 70% of population instead of Mandarin, the official language of Taiwan. "You are real Taiwanese, not Guaxinglang," she would intone between brushstrokes as she readied my hair for plaiting each morning. So I don't know how many people keep up with the news in California, but there was a horrific shooting a few days ago. It was a mainlander who had such hatred for the Taiwanese that he chained the doors to a church and shot many people. Well, 5 or 6, and one heroic doctor actually disarmed him and died as a result. So if you don't know too much about Taiwanese history, I think I would like to illuminate a little bit. So the next story I'm going to read is from the perspective of a mainlander family who has moved to Taiwan. Okay, so it's this one, Colonel and Mrs. Wang. And in this excerpt that I'm going to read, the narrator is going to be the mother, and Gao Liang is the son who is a political dissident. So he's grown up in Taiwan and he has adopted liberal values. And his father is Colonel Wang, and he is a Kuomintang officer. So he still holds to the lines, the beliefs of the conquering, whatever you want to call it, the government, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to start from not exactly the beginning, but the mother has found out that another neighbor of theirs has been taken. A sudden fear gripped me, and I knew I had to speak. Gao Liang, there is something that concerns me greatly. I'm sure you've heard Mr. Tang has been taken. Well, I'm really worried about you. Don't worry, Ma. I may be outspoken, but I'm not careless. I only speak my mind when it's safe. But all your talk about democracy, these are dangerous times. The time is coming for a change. Democracy will come to Taiwan, and I'm going to be a part of it. At this point, a baritone boomed from the doorway. Stay out of things you know nothing about. The colonel marched barefoot onto the tatami mat, wearing the undershirt and comfortable slacks that he reserved for off-work hours. He always changed from his uniform upon his return from the army offices each day in order to maintain the stiffness in the collar and the creases in the pants between cleanings. Gao Liang stood and faced his father, standing half a head taller than the gray-haired man. Baba, good evening. I don't ever want you talking like that again in my house. Do you hear? My husband strode past him to the desk, unlocked a drawer, and with his back toward us, withdrew a wad of cash. Ai Guo only came back for money in the middle of a mahjong game when he was losing. Though we could ill afford the losses, my husband continued his weekly games, preferring to scrimp elsewhere rather than to lose face in front of other officers. From his agitated manner, I was certain he was faring particularly badly. I turned to Gao Liang, put a finger to my lips, and shook my head. He moved closer to his father. My son said, like what? Like the three principles of the people? Nationalism, democracy, socialism. Isn't that what the Kuomintang stands for? Ai Guo turned and sputtered. Don't you ever talk against the government. I'm not talking against the government. I'm just repeating what the government supposedly believes. Of course, nobody ever said anything about years of martial law being part of the principles. Ai Guo put his red face up to Gao Liang's. Don't you get smart with me. General Li Zimo Chang is doing what needs to be done to control the Taiwanese rabble. Sure, putting people in prison on trumped up charges. There's a real leader for you. Gao Liang, please don't talk to your father like that. You stay out of this. This is men's business. My husband glared at me. Yeah, real man. Do you know the Americans laugh at your government's ambitions? Do you really think that your puny Kuomintang forces will be able to overcome the communists? We will take back the mainland and liberate our compatriots. Empty slogans, oh man, wake up. The only reason the Maoists haven't overrun this island is because of American protection. Let go of your pipe dream. Don't you dare talk to me like that, you traitor. Ai Guo raised his hand as if to strike Gao Liang. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Please stop. Okay, so that was a bit much for an afternoon. Okay, so that was my first publication. And after it came out, the Taiwanese Canadian Historical Society asked if I would write a biography-based account of modern Taiwanese history and North American immigration. So the result of that is this book, Shadows of the Crimson Sun. This is Dr. Charles Yang. He was one of the first Taiwanese immigrants to Vancouver, and he's a very respected elder in the Taiwanese community. When when I was looking for somebody to write about, actually the society wanted me to write about a whole bunch of people, but I just thought it was a bit too overwhelming with so many subjects. So I just wanted to pick one person. And Dr. Yang was kind enough to allow me to interview him. I did a lot of research over 3 years and made a couple of trips to Taiwan, spoke to some of the leaders of the democracy movement. They went through so much to get Taiwan to the place where it is now. And so I chose this section to read from because, this is him when he was 8 years old. I chose this chapter to read about it because it's Manchuria right after the Second World War. And Russia has invaded its neighbor. So it sounds so familiar. I brought it up because of what's happening in the Ukraine. And it was pretty atrocious. At the time, there was a neutrality pact that between Russia and Japan, and Russia suddenly canceled it, and then they invaded 3 months after Germany surrendered. So this is nonfiction, creative nonfiction, but this is based on the stories that he told me about his childhood. When the loud knocking sounded at noon, Dr. Takayama assumed it was one of his acquaintances. He would not have dared to open the door at night. Akihisa and his younger brother, Tadahisa, trailed after their father as he opened the door. Sorry, I should say that the children had Japanese names because they were under Japanese rule. A blast of icy air hit them, and they found themselves staring into the barrel of a pistol. It was the first time Akihisa had ever seen a gun up close. The gaping black hole of the metallic instrument held him spellbound. His eyes widened, and he found himself unable to breathe. Dr. Takayama took a surprise step back into the foyer and nearly knocked Akihisa over. The 2 uniformed Russian soldiers pushed their way in and closed the door. To Akihisa, they were gigantic, both clean-shaven. One wore the khaki uniform of the lower ranks. The other looked like an officer. He had on a fur hat and wore a clean gray coat with shiny brass buttons on top of his forest green uniform. It was he who trained the gun on Dr. Takayama. Chetsi! The officer tapped his left wrist 3 times with the tip of his handgun, then swiftly pointed the pistol back at the family. Dr. Takayama did not move. Akihisa noticed his father's right hand was shaking. He had never seen his father so frightened before. This was the same man whom Akihisa had once seen suturing his own big toe without anesthetic after accidentally stepping on a broken bottle. The same man who had so ably kept their family from harm all through the war. His father's fear heightened Akihisa's terror. He grasped his younger brother's hand and edged back toward the wall. The movement seemed to irritate the officer, and he aimed the gun at the children. The soldier pushed his way past the Takayamas toward the bedrooms. Dr. Takayama looked after him worriedly, but there was little he could do to protect his wife and other children. Chetsi! The officer yelled. He cocked the pistol. Akihisa's hands felt damp, but he didn't know if the moisture originated with him or his brother. Dr. Takayama quickly removed the watch from his wrist and handed it to the man. The officer examined the watch and slipped it into his coat pocket. Of course, Akihisa thought. He had heard so many stories of how the Russian soldiers loved watches. Some had collections that covered the lengths of their arms. Now that they've gotten what they came for, maybe they'll leave. Akihisa let out his breath and relaxed his hold on Tadahisa. But the Russians were not finished. The 2 soldiers stomped with their dirty high boots throughout the house, looking under tatami mats and emptying drawers, searching for other valuables. There was little to take by this point. Much of what the family owned had gone toward financing the necessities of life, food and fuel. The wartime rations of salt, sugar, and rice counted as luxuries now. Gaoliang was the staple grain, and they were lucky to have that as well as a bit of coal. Akahisa had heard of people who burned asphalt in order to stay warm. Luckily, their family had not reached that stage. Dr. Takayama followed the men at a distance as they made their way through the house. For the first time, Akahisa wondered how his father had managed to keep their family alive and how they would survive without the head of the household. Thank you. I don't know if I exceeded or went under the 15, but you can let me know.
That was lovely. Thank you, Julia. Thank you. Thank you so much. I remember a number of years ago that I had invited you to give a talk and a reading at UBC during Asian Heritage Month. And those stories that you read then and the story that you just read now is just as fresh, you know, so many years later. So thank you for sharing with us. And also your book, nonfiction book as well, with about Dr. Charles Yang. Thank you for that, sharing that with us as well. I know that you put in a lot of research. You asked me and a number of librarians and researchers at UBC for research support as well. So I'm really glad that the book came together and you've shared it with us today. So thank you for that.
Always appreciate your help, Allan.
And next up, we have Sam Cheuk. A few words about Sam. I met Sam a few years ago when Sam had submitted some poetry to Rice Paper magazine. And this was still fresh from the wounds of the movement in Hong Kong. And I thought, wow, these poems are so powerful, so fresh. And accompanying them were also photos as well of Sam's time in Hong Kong. And he took some real fascinating and powerful photos and streetscapes of Hong Kong. Some of those are still in Rice Paper magazine, so you can see them online. So that was, my first introduction to Sam's poetry. And later on, those poems became part of his book. So I'm really, really honored to have Sam today giving us a reading and introduction to his work as a writer. I hand the stage over to you, Sam.
I'm gonna read 4 poems from the book that you spoke of, and then 2 more from something I'm working on. It's still kind of in the first stage kind of thing. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Sam, I noticed that your camera is off. Do you want to have it remain off, or did you have it off accidentally?
I don't really care, to be honest.
Oh, okay. It's good to see you.
October 29th, 2019. A mood descends on the city. Call it fidelity, maybe. But it's not love. Neither can its name be mercy. Bodies are falling out of high-rises, ripened with meaning. That deaths are supposed to turn to something. They fall like fruit. No. Call it chill. Suspicious, we share plates, gossip. News bring news and not much else. Scenery on fire. We're used to being tired, but not like this. Call the way out, a spiriting away. There is necessarily a fill-in every story. But what if it is the sun? If it brings a day, and the day brings another day, it keeps going, extends, chains. Love, it is elsewhere. What is this terror? Not knowing what sheaths it into shape. November 6th, 2019. There's a new tradition of politicians on the wrong side stabbed without passion. Security camera keeps looking away, their irony unerring. Then there's a student on the ground who know how this one fell. The only evidence of his existence soon seeped into the asphalt of another district. At least there's that much. I want to be remembered, but more blood will only dilute whose came before, a diminishing return. What I want to record most is the simplicity of love I see floating about the streets. People accidentally finding it just in time, right there, maybe before being erased too. I'm being pretentious. They must know it's love in the meander ways of flirting, the raunchy jokes, condensation of summer heat beating down the bottleneck, apparition of desire left behind in the figure of a lone woman vomiting in the back alley after closing time, neon flickering pink and yellow on her skin. Let me bite you a little, just tender enough to leave a small bruise, easily hidden, that goes away in time. November 7th, 2019. Your face turning away suggests otherwise. There is no shame in wanting to be more beautiful. Whatever happiness it is you find your secrecy behind your hair, trellising the meridian of your neck, of your back. What is it you wish for me to witness? You're enough in your own, too much, really. My desire is a simple beast. May I be beautiful in your hunger. Sitting bedside, the news unfurling on TV, before we undress for sex or sleep. The city burning beneath us. Take off your clothes. Let me find who you've been holding in behind. Fuck whatever else is burning. Let it all burn. November 16th, 2019. I used to be a teacher. What I'm to say when a student responds after confessing I'm too chicken shit to stay, will fight for all of us. They announce their names, yelling, I will not kill myself while being dragged away. In case a name is mistaken for one fallen by mistake. The students still messaging me via an encrypted app, assuring he's safe for my sake. If you were to die, Don't die for my sake. Die of old age, when neither of us can envision. Die for love. Die of earned sadness, sickness. But not for this. Not now. Wait till my parents die. Till I die. Stay. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so this is hopefully going to be my next manuscript. And I partnered with an ex-student of mine who is a visual artist, Matt Stoker, who does pretty cool stuff in my mind, but I'm not a visual artist, so I'll let you guys see if it's cool or not. But I wrote the poems, and then it's going to be on alternating pages of vellum and paper. And his drawings would be both, well, it'll be on vellum, and he's in charge of doing the censorship stuff and also doing cool drawings. I'm just gonna, I'll read the poem first and then kind of scroll down to see, for people to see what kind of stuff that Matt Stoker is doing. But the first poem's called Black Milk. My child in the shape of chalky line and design I'd learned from hearsay. My child, a double parallel line, waving hereafter and after. My child, we're a dumpling, you're the filling. I'm gonna get stretch mark, say cheese. My child, outline of my bloating and swelling. Mama's gonna buy her some new clothes. You get hand-me-downs. I have to make the math work. My child, will you be a boy or a girl? You're a question, too many questions, and my life's one answer. My child, whose name above a horizontal line, what the American calls the John Hancock, you'll teach me later, then your father's Hancock, then mine, and take you both home. My child here, still ground by your grandma. You know their face later, I'm late for work. My child, your chubby pighead, resting sideways on a train's meal tray, imagining cartoon characters in clouds and landscape, framed in rural power lines, speeding and stretching on by. Borderlines of purple to brown to yellow of my child's bruise, blurring finally into the shapeless color of flesh. My child, your head on the couch's arm rest, watching the end credits roll with maybe my name on it. Red streaks across my child's homework. Are you dumb? Or do you like staying up late? Across the finish line, my child second. It's okay. You're on the podium. I don't care for track and field. Anyway, try again. Don't ask me these questions. I don't know, my child. Right is right and wrong is wrong. Just stay left. My child, you look just like your father when I met him, but his hair was greased like farmer, your hair all goofy candy like undergraduate hat. Where did you disappear to one night, my child? I know you're back and cowlick on top of your head. What, you just steal a sniff? When you look down to most dinners rushed through and back to your laptop. What does her face look like now? Maybe it's your face pressed to the sidewalk, watching red and blue lights go round and round. With my child starting as a robber. My God, it was you who fell, often conscious. Oh my God, please, my God, my child. It's my child, please God. I know better now that the arrhythmia between the metabolic ticks was not a sign of my child's fighting spirit. More paper and documents and certificate to sign my John Hancock. Then the coroners and both my child's name, top billing. I read their enzymes that only activate around 8 hours post-mortem. And that's another possible way a coroner can measure my child's exit time. What kind of God would make such things? A clock is a dot with lines radiating outwards. My child, my dot, towards I inwardly turn and return. My child's name repeating on the telly, on newspaper, online, on everything. My child's name is mine, it's mine, it's mine. Let my baby go, please. What not English phrase survived by my name, your father's name? Who else's name do you think should go here, my child? Am I on the list? Their face is rubber, my face rubber, maybe my child's too. Do I take a peek? Fuck off, home visitors. let its mother take one more peek. You, my child, and your first primary school uniform in the background, and the rest of black in it. I hear his shoes. They go tick-tock, tick-tock, tick. The scattered notes on the notation lines in front of my child's piano. The lines go on forever, blankly. The clothesline, two clips chiming in the absence of my child's wet tea in this god-awful wind.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sam.
I'm not going to read the other one.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sam. That's wonderful. I remember when you had published your poetry in our magazine Rice Paper, you had powerful imagery of your experiences in streets of Hong Kong, and it was just so imagery so vivid that I love to discuss more about it in the questions that I'm going to be asking you and Julia in the next while as well. So thank you for this reading. Really appreciate it. It's amazing stuff. For this next part, I'm going to ask Julia and Sam a couple of questions before I open it to the audience. And to our audience, if you have questions, please send them in the message, or if you'd like to ask, you can also raise your hand as well, and I'd be more than happy to call on you to ask your question. But I can't wait to get started because I have some questions for Julia and Sam. So I'm going to ask them right now. Now, Sam and Julia, you belong to a new generation of Hong Kong-born and Taiwan-born Canadian writers whose literary works often draw on your own transnational experiences. Now, based now in North America, how do you view your own writing and authorship within the context of Asian Canadian literature? Maybe I'll start off with Julia.
Okay. Well, I have the dubious honor of being the first Taiwanese Canadian literary writer. I see that somebody else who's Taiwanese Canadian just self-published something. So I'm looking forward to having Taiwanese writers that are in Canada join me. At first, when I put out Mia, I just thought I needed to. I think it's a trap that a lot of Asian writers fall into. We feel like we need to represent our people for some reason. And I just came across this great quote from, it's a young writer called Siran J. Zhao. She's in Vancouver as well. And first generation Chinese immigrant. They write YA. And she struggled with that as well. I think it's she. I'm sorry, it's they. They struggled with that as well. And I love this quote. It says, "Just be yourself and stop worrying what you do is going to represent your whole people, because that's not on you." So this is something that, being raised as Chinese people, we're also responsible. We need to present ourselves, a certain way. But I think I'm just a little tip of, I see a whole generation of new writers, young, vibrant writers coming up. And I'm sure some of them will be Taiwanese. And I don't want to distinguish myself really from the broader Asian Chinese group. I mean, because of our political situation, the Taiwanese elders, especially, who have lived through the White Terror and have terrible memories of Chinese, the Kuomintang, the people that came over from mainland China. And because of the Taiwanese independence movement, we always distinguish ourselves as Taiwanese. And sometimes I think that's it excludes us from certain things because we want to, stand off from the rest of the Chinese. But having lived here, I have friends who have been here for generations. Their parents or the great-great-grandparents came to build the railroad, right? And we're all Chinese. I really think being here in a multicultural society erases a lot of those boundaries. And so, yes, I am Taiwanese Canadian, but I am also just Asian Canadian. And it's funny, just crossing the border into America, there are quite a few Americans who write that are Taiwanese. And they let me be counted sometimes as a Taiwanese American writer, but there is a it's so weird. I mean, we're all writing in English, and we're all, some of the names that come up, like author of Green Island, Shauna Ryan, right? Has those same, Shauna Yang Ryan. She has those same experiences from her family history. Julie Wu, the third son, the same, right? But because we live in the cold north, we are distinct in that way, which for me is actually a privilege to be here, because they wrote before me. Shauna did for sure, and there were other writers like Francine Lin. They all they were out there way before. So being in a smaller population has given me that, well, honor, I guess, of that, which I would have had if I were writing in America. So I think that answers sort of your question.
Before I hand it over to you, Sam, I want to thank you for sharing with us your new work as well. It's always a treat to see an artist crafting their work and sharing the publication before it's out to the public. So that was really, really fun to read your work in progress, Sam. So thank you for that. So I hand the microphone over to you, Sam. What are your thoughts about this question of your work drawing on your transnational experiences?
It's a little bit weird when it comes to Hong Kong Cantonese, because it was always a mix of Hong Kong Cantonese and English to begin with. So the question of transnational seems kind of weird to me in my head, because I mean, my English was crap when I came over here. And when I came over here, I was like, growing up in grade school and people dissing me about me not speaking English, and like, well, I'm kind of speaking English, but you know what? I'm gonna fuck you all up. And that's how I got into poetry because there's no harder thing to, in my mind anyways, at that time, to be like, oh, I'm gonna write poetry, and y'all can't do any of that, or not well anyways. I mean, some of them kind of did. Anywho, so going back to the transnational thing, yeah, I think for most part, it's with the current book right now anyways, I had a chance to return to write in both English and Chinese. Chinese just a little bit because my Chinese is really, really rusty at this point. But I didn't have to write in English. Definitely didn't have to write in Chinese, thank God. But it just allowed me that space to be like, oh, I can be both of these personas and put it within one book. So I'm glad for that. Glad that you know, my publisher and editors like, yeah, that's cool. You can throw Chinese words in there. Yeah, that's about it.
It's, upon reflection, I didn't design it this way, but I'm really grateful for today's two authors because we really span the genres. We have nonfiction, fiction, poetry. So it's really, really interesting how we're able to speak and talk and discuss about not only our influences, but also the wide range of genres as well. So that's kind of not designed, it's kind of serendipitous as well. If you have questions from the audience, please feel free to type it in our chat box or put your hand up, and I'd be more than happy to have you ask your question. But I have the next one. There's been some time since you both published your work. There's been a few years since you published your work, and lots of things have happened in the world, in Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China. The world has changed, certainly. How do you view Hong Kong and Taiwan now compared to time that you were when you were writing the book? How have things changed since then? Over to you, Julia. Why don't you begin first?
Okay. I think for Taiwan, I mean, for Hong Kong as well, everything has become more precarious. The rights are, well, in Hong Kong, definitely. But speaking specifically of Taiwan, watching what's happening in Hong Kong and also watching what's happening in the Ukraine. I mean, this invasion by Russia of a democracy is something that's potentially is a very possible scenario because you know, Xi Jinping is now a leader probably for life because he's eliminated his the limits on his terms, and one of his aims, he's vowing to bring Taiwan, that renegade province, back to the motherland, right? So I am worried. When I talk to my relatives, it's sort of, what can you do? And not, like my uncle especially, it's like, right? What really can you do if the US doesn't come to Taiwan's aid? Then it's a foregone conclusion. I mean, this little tiny island, no matter how many weapons you sell to this little tiny island, you're not going to have the population to fight this big country. So it is, I see it going downwards in terms of optimism for long-term future, but who knows? I mean, I'm not a political science expert, And so it really weighs on me, but I am not Taiwanese when I go back because they see me with my, they see me differently. I said, thank you for being concerned about us, basically, even though I was born there. But, and I am a real hybrid now, right? My kids are half white and they're, you know, going to live here forever. I'll be buried here or cremated, whatever happens. So, you know, it's something that as people who care about justice and fairness in the world and human rights, it's just something that we really don't want to see. But at the same time, our hands are tied looking at how the war in Ukraine has been handled. I mean, nobody, and they're not part of NATO, so nobody can go and actually fight for them. So it's really sad. Yeah, so there have been changes, not for the better. Long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Julia. Sam, what are your thoughts?
I think you don't see it too much reported within the Western media, is that China is going through their own stuff itself. And yes, don't get me wrong, they're still really powerful. But given, you know, the recent COVID stuff that's happened in Shanghai and Beijing, especially, symbolic kind of, yeah, you didn't quite manage to do as well you thought you would. That's gonna, and that's not even talking about like many other provinces in which there are outbreaks. China will be strong in the way that a poker analysis, or not analysis, comparison. But right now, Beijing, well, not Beijing, but CCP is going in almost all in with like Jack 6 or something close to that. Like, it looks kind of good, but I'm curious as to see how they manage to contain what Hong Kongers call mainlanders kind of discontent in the next while, because it's one of those things that, and you've seen it in history over and over again, regardless of how authoritarian a government can be, once the switch flips, then, well, look at, you know, someone like, I don't know, Stalin, for example. He didn't really get killed, but kind of. Anyway, as for Hong Kong is a foregone conclusion. Hong Kong's not even all that important to, you know, the economy or really just worth to the CCP. It's just a city that kind of started crap again. And this time they're like, we're gonna make them shut up. And they did exactly just that, because it's not like Hong Kong during like 1997 or something like that, where Hong Kong was still pulling in a lot of money into mainland. Hong Kong's just and not a city now. So it was understandable politically for them to crush Hong Kong descent. And logically, I can understand that. Morally, I really hate it, but politics is politics. It's how things run.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sam and Julia. Really thoughtful answers. I have a question from an audience member. I'm going to read this out. This is a very good question. I get this question sometimes as well. What are your thoughts about the similarities and differences being a Taiwanese or Hong Kong Canadian writer compared to, say, a Taiwanese or Hong Kong writer in the United States or in the UK, Australia, etc.? And I'm talking about Anglo writing. Both as in writers and what you write, as well as audiences and their reactions. What are the difference, do you think? Asian Canadian versus Asian American, or British Asian, Australo-Asian. What are your thoughts about this? Julia.
I think we're looking at general differences between the two countries in terms of societal attitudes. You know, the old cliche, we're not a melting pot, we're a salad. I think that holds true. We are more tolerant. I like to believe that, even though we had things happen. We do have extremist groups here, but I also see more tolerance. I don't feel as afraid here if I were to go out onto the streets, even though Vancouver logged a lot of anti-Asian hate. So maybe things have shifted during the pandemic, but I just feel for us in Canada, it's a different vibe. The racial divide is not as distinct. I mean, for Americans, it seems like it's almost, maybe my perception is wrong, but it's almost like it's a very dominant part of their conversation all the time, because the slavery history has been so, long-standing, and the grievances are so old and deep, and generations after generation, things keep happening, so for us, I think I like to believe that we are a bit more tolerant. I may be mistaken, but so in that way, as a writer, I think we convey those attitudes more. Not like if I were to write in America, I'm working on a novel right now, actually, which somebody read it and they said, so anti-China, oh no. So I don't know if I would be, because America is such a big country, and so everything's magnified, I feel. Whereas here, I can say my little thing, and I don't think, I take comfort in the fact that Denise Chong wrote Egon Mao, and she still got to go to China. So I don't feel like I'm going to be banned if I write stuff that's critical. And I don't know if I would be more careful if I were writing in the US or UK, but I feel freer in a way. And maybe I'm just completely naive, but that's how I feel.
Thanks, Julia. Sam, over to you.
That's a really hard question to answer, to be honest. But I feel like it's where along the lines do you want to go towards Joy Luck Club? It's like, my most recent book, give me 1 second. Sorry. It's about something that honestly, I don't think most North American readers would give a crap about. That's very specific to the Hong Kong situation. And I know that like within media, they reported about that stuff a little bit, but I honestly don't think that most people really paid much attention to it. So then it becomes, okay, I'm writing in English and I'm writing about a very specific situation in which you cannot relate to. So how can I make it relate to you, kind of thing? And then there's that stupid Joy Luck Club joke where it's like, well, how do we make this relatable to a North American experience that's like somewhat Chinese or something like that, right? And it's gonna go around, you know, the stereotypes, oh, Chinese people loving their family and, you know, having chats over meals and things like that. Details in which that the general North American audience can understand in a way that they understand broccoli and beef, which I'm pretty sure that none of us understand the whole broccoli and beef thing. Yeah, that's about it. It's trying to draw the line between figuring out what you write that feels authentically to yourself and your ethnic identity versus catering to a wider audience in North America or Europe or whatever. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Julia and Sam, for sharing with us your North American perspectives. It's very challenging to also compare it with other countries that that have an entirely different context. But thank you for sharing with us your thoughts about your own experiences. In the audience, we have a question. Somebody raised their hands. Helena, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Oh, thank you, Allan. Thank you so much, Julia and Sam, for sharing your thoughts and experience with us. I really enjoy reading your works. My question surrounds voice or your use of voice in your works. For Julia, you capture so well the identity and emotional complexity in your book, Mian. Okay. You portray different times, generations, and perspectives tied to Taiwan and Taiwan diaspora. Just now you read the first story from the book that was told from the perspective of Tracy. And in another story, we have the mother actually of Gao Liang. So another character you introduced to us just now as the first person narrator, I. And at other times, we have the stories told in third person, whether they are set in Taiwan or Canada, past or present. So I'm very intrigued by your use of first person and third person narrations when going from one story to another. So would you like to tell us about your choice or your thought when having this design? And I have a question for Sam. Shall I ask it now or after?
Why don't we ask it after?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good question that I don't really think about when I write. I usually use whatever voice is natural, and so for these, I'm just flipping through my book and going, why did I choose that? I really don't. I'll tell you, I struggle with voice right now. I have the novel that I'm working on is I've tried third person, I've tried first person, I go back and forth. And, you know, with a novel, there's a lot of rewriting if you're going to change the viewpoint, right? So it's whatever feels good for that particular story. I don't have any, I don't think I consciously say, okay, I'm going to do this in third person because blah, blah, blah. I really just try it out. And then if it's not working, you know how when you write, it just feels wrong. It's not working. It's not conveying what you want to convey. And so you try something else. That's how I decided on which way I was going to go with each of the stories in the collection.
Thank you so much, Julia. Yeah. My other question is for Sam. Sam, I found your poems so powerful, and especially when you are reciting them, really moved me a lot. So in Postscript from A City Burning, you use dates to name your poems, right? And I also found this second person you appearing from time to time in your poems. So would you like to share with us this you in your mind when you compose your work? Or how do you view this, this second person pronoun you in relation to the lyrical voice in your creative response to, let's say, times, Hong Kong? That's my question. Thank you.
So I have a bad habit of using the second person all the time. But because it is flexible, it could be myself talking to myself. It could be me talking to another person. It could be me talking to a third person. But within this collection specifically, when the you happens, it's me questioning myself. And there are a lot of other voices that I try to capture from, you know, people with whom I've spoken with during the protests and stuff like that. And when it's necessary or feels necessary for me to not provide too much information, then I would just glue all of this you into this nebulous you that pretty much means we. Yeah, it's one of those little tricks, I guess, that can keep people safe. And yeah, that's about it.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have one question from the audience, and I will read it out loud. This is a really good question here. Let's find it here. Now, in terms of your writing, is social reality a source of inspiration, or is it one of burden, or is it a false dichotomy? What are your thoughts about this? Maybe Julia can start. Oh, Julia, I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry, try that again. Social reality, I do follow the news quite a bit, and because the book that I'm working on right now deals, I've set it in Beijing, so I follow a lot of the Chinese media as best I can, and it's so, you know how truth is stranger Then fiction, so true when it comes to China. There are so many things that you go, wow, really? And so it's inspirational for me to, I draw inspiration from the things that are happening. I'm doing a novel, so I'm not doing, nonfiction, but it's still, it does influence the direction that my writing takes. So yeah, I think the work that I would like to produce, I would like it to be informative in some way, not just be entertaining. So I try to weave in as much as I can.
Julia. Sam, what are your thoughts about this question?
Can you repeat the question again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to. The question is, in terms of your writing, is social reality a source of inspiration, or is it a source of a burden? Is it a false dichotomy?
Man, there are no easy questions here. Well, first of all, social reality is a really loaded sociological term that I've only taken a few classes in sociology. Okay, so won't go into that. But I will say that when the burden comes upon you, you have two options. You either write about it or you back off. And it was easy for me because I wasn't stuck in Hong Kong or anything like that, right? Like, I have my Canadian passport and things like that. I can always come back. And when the book was about to come out, I was like, oh, back to Canada, even though I really want to stay in Hong Kong and see more stuff. And now I only get, hearsay and whatever I read on the news and things like that. So that was a little bit heartbreaking, but I also knew that the freedom of speech was being corroded, and it's pretty much just straight up corroded now. It's gone. So I had a position in which I'm like, okay, I'm a writer. I have dual citizenship, which Hong Kong doesn't recognize anyways, but Canada does, so it doesn't really matter. For me to say stuff that writers back in Hong Kong are increasingly self-censoring or just not saying anything at all. So kind of sucks to not be able to, go around the corner of the place I was renting and just eat, beef stew or something like that. But it felt necessary.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Julia, for your thoughts on this question and all the other questions that I've asked and the audience have asked. We could go on and on. We can go on for hours because it's such deep topics that we've come across, and we can continue having discussion. But I'm also mindful of the time. We reached the end of the time for the formal part of the discussion. But before I hand it back to Leo, I want to say thank you to Julia and Sam. Thank you for also introducing us to your upcoming new books as well. I'm really looking forward. It's always like going into a restaurant, seeing a chef cooking and seeing all the flavors, and you can sort of see it behind the scenes. So it's so exciting, and I look forward to be part of your launch in the future as well. So let me know when it comes out. So thank you, Julia and Sam. And back to Leo.
Thank you, Allan, and especially thanks Julia and Sam for your reading and for your thoughtful reflections on these questions, right? Difficult questions, but very interesting questions. So wonderful. So before I draw this event to a close, I would like to sort of remind our audience that we will host our last City Reassembled event sometime in mid-June. So if you are interested, you could go to our website and sign up for our newsletters to get more information. I'm also happy to announce that our speakers have kindly agreed to stay behind for a few more minutes in case some of you would like to say hi or just to chat after the recording is over. So with that, I would like to, again, thank you for joining us today. I know some of you are in different time zones than the speakers and we're in Vancouver, but I know just some of you are in Asia. I also want to thank Allan for putting together this panel, this conversation, and being such a wonderful moderator. That's great, Allan, thank you. And I also want to thank our student helpers, especially Sonia Kung, but also Brandon, for working behind the scene. Thank you. And of course, I want to once again thank Sam and Julia for generously sharing with us today. So with that, please once again join me in thanking everybody.